You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Faith and Other Oddities, where we are still in the book of Samuel. We just wrapped up chapter 3 and went a whole lot of places I did not expect to go with that. I mean, we went from Genesis all the way to Paul.
Yeah.
So
Avoided Revelation just barely, but
just stop short. Yeah, that's one we're probably not going to discuss, so don't ask. Right?
Hey, I'm there with you. That's more than I want to bite off and chew for so many reasons, not to mention that the Greek is just like crazy weird. So
yeah,
I'm willing to deal with textual anomalies in Hebrew, but my Greek is not good enough to even begin to deal with Revelation.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, there have been many who have tried, and I think
most have failed.
That book, wow. So, but let's talk about this book.
Yes.
It's more accessible.
I know where to begin with this one. And so, but yeah, we're actually getting ready to go into, I know, one of your favorite stories of the Old Testament. And
yeah, are we getting all the way to that?
We're getting pretty close. Yeah, I think we are. And
so,
oh, well, maybe not.
So we're doing chapter 4. The ark doesn't get returned until 6.
Okay,
so,
well, you got to have this for setup, though.
Well, yeah,
so.
I mean, we have to have 4. So yeah, that's, and actually, we're getting to one of the stories about why this podcast even exists. So let's.
Which story are you thinking?
The same one.
The same one. Oh,
Keep
okay.
going. I mean, there were a couple of them, but this is one of them.
Yeah, well, always the other oddities. So faith is important, but the oddities are too.
Yes.
So, well, we open up with chapter 4. It's a temporal clause in the Hebrew. We'll get technical right off the bat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way to get them.
Yeah. Now the word
Start
of the Lord.
With the jargon.
Now the word of the Lord came to all of Israel. So basically, what the writer is telling you, people know who Samuel is. He has been established as a prophet. It's not just contained within Shiloh now, that God is actually speaking to the nation as a whole, and he's doing it from Shiloh through Samuel. Mm-hmm. So this is important because what's getting ready to happen, we're going to see how the people don't know what to do when they have a prophet. They just kind of miss the point of God sending a prophet to begin with. And so, I mean, in typical biblical fashion, and that's one of the things I do love about the Bible, is the fact that God says, hey, you need to do it this way. Mm-hmm. And then people go out of their way to figure out a way not to do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, go out of your way to do it the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some debate, and I did not realize this until just last night, way after I finished all these notes, whether or not that now the word of the Lord came to all of Israel should go with this chapter or the previous chapter. And the debate's based actually on the way you sing the Bible. If you're going to sing it in Hebrew, and that's what gives the clue as to where to do the chapter and verses breaks.
Gotcha.
And I don't know enough about that to give you any kind of, how it works. But I think it's kind of interesting that the singing of the word was so pivotal to maintaining and keeping this word alive, and for us to even know how to pronounce it. And so music is actually a huge part of the history of preserving the Old Testament. So just a freebie. Okay. But and so anyway, this section that we're going into, and the section encompasses chapter 4 to chapter 7, verse 2. And most scholars all agree that this was probably a separate account that was written and told outside of Samuel before it was incorporated into the book of Samuel.
Okay.
Now, Bergen, and he's one of our commentators that we're drawing from, he says, yes, it probably was. The thing is, it's been so thoroughly incorporated within the story that there's basically no way to reconstruct what the original story would have said apart from Samuel.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because there's so many phrases and linguistic connections that really anchor it within this book. So verse 1, the second part, so, in verse 2, we're being told that the Israelites go into the war against the Philistines. We're not told why. We just know that, hey, they're going to fight the Philistines.
Mhm.
Now, this is...
Well, I'd imagine if we assume this is during the time of Judges,
Mhm.
which we know it's during the time of the Judges, if we
Mhm.
assume it's after Samson, I
Precisely.
think that's pretty safe.
hmm
Then I'd imagine that the Philistines are pretty sore about losing their temple
Yeah.
and all those folks.
Precisely. And that's what I was getting ready to say. This is where the scholars see the interlock between Samuel and the Judges. That it was at this point, I get so excited about all this stuff. I talk too fast. Anyway, it's at this point that they think these actions are occurring right after Samson.
Mhm.
So if you take those last two stories, the Levite and Micah and the Levite and the concubine, if you take those last two stories off and kind of scoot Samuel's timeline back to Samson,
Mhm.
and then those other two stories, we don't know where they happen other than they happen before Samuel. So they could happen anywhere in that time period of the Judges.
And possibly even concurrent with Samson's dealings with the Philistines.
Exactly. Because those stories were focused on the common everyday people, where the Judges' stories were focused on the individual judge.
Mhm.
So, and this was a nation. So lots of things were going on. And I think we kind of forget that not everybody's involved in every Bible story that's being told.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I think part of that's our perception of the way we present these stories when we have the church plays. The
Mhm.
population is of the whole nation is like 12.
Right.
That's all that can fit on the platform.
Yeah, on one side of the table anyway. So, but anyway.
Sorry, no, that was pretty good.
Yeah, occasionally. So, but yeah, to remember that this is a fully functioning nation, and there are tens of thousands of people. We really don't know the precise number,
Right.
but there's a lot of people going on with their daily lives while all of this is happening. And if we didn't have Facebook and we didn't have the internet, just to remember back when we were kids, the things that would happen in our nation that we wouldn't have any clue about till, months and months later,
Mhm.
because they didn't make the nightly news. And now try to take that even further back in the cultural setting where...
Yeah, well, information was the speed of a horse.
Exactly.
At best.
Exactly. If you had a horse, which the Israelites didn't have a lot of those, but that's a whole other story. So
They have
anyway,
camels.
they did, and they were mostly used for women to ride on.
Oh, that's right. We covered that.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry.
Slept since then, didn't you?
Yep, I did.
So the Israelites, they camp at Ebenezer, and the Philistines, they're camped at Aphek. So it's the southern end of the plain of Sharon, and the west of the hill country of Ephraim. So the location isn't important other than to let you know that the Philistines, they're trying to expand their territory, is basically what's going on. They want to expand north, and they're going to have to come up against Israel to make that happen. We aren't really given any other details other than 4,000 Israelites were killed.
Mhm.
Because the thing is, the battle's not important here. The battle is, it kind of gives you the framework for what's being said and what the lesson is.
Right.
But the writer doesn't care. I mean, he just really doesn't. He only wants you to focus in on one thing, and that's in verse 3. And it's when the people ask, why has the Lord defeated us? And they at least have the wherewithal to recognize that the Lord has defeated them, that the Philistines didn't do it.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, it's why has the Lord defeated us? Because our enemies aren't good enough to take us out.
Exactly. But notice who they're asking this question to. They're asking the elders of Israel. They are not talking to Samuel. They have a prophet. And instead of going to the prophet who talks to God, they go to the elders. And you got to remember who the elders were. These were the same men whose brilliant solution to a woman being raped and killed in Gibeah was to rape and kidnap 600 more women and then start a civil war that almost destroys the tribe of Benjamin.
Right.
These are not the guys with the best track record. I don't think there's somebody you really want to consult, and particularly not when you have a Samuel.
Right.
And so we're seeing that the people, they still haven't got it. They don't have a clue. Now, we should note that these elders were instituted by God. They're established by Moses, and that's in Exodus 18, verses 13 through 27. That's when Jethro goes to Moses and says, hey, this is too heavy for you to bear, and you're going to need some help. And then Numbers 11, 16 through 17, we have it retold, and this time it's approved by God that these elders would be in place. And their job was to take care of the lesser issues and free up Moses' time and energy so that he could deal with the more complex issues. And that's who they were supposed to be. And there's some really fun plays on words in that story with when Moses is setting up that council of elders, because that's also at the time of the story where Aaron and Hur stand with him on the hillside and when his arms were up. And the idea of heaviness and the glory of God is tied to heaviness and the word kavod. And you begin to see all of these connections because we're going to have heaviness and kavod and the ability of a prophet to impact the outcome of a nation's battle. All of this is going to get tied in. I didn't go into all of it, but if you want to go back and read those sections in Exodus and Numbers, they might actually be something you find profitable for helping understand as we go forward.
Well, and kavod, that one, that's weight, or we translate it glory often.
Exactly.
Thank you, Tim Mackey.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The Hebrew writers, they do this wonderful way of playing on words to conjure up imagery and to show how physical acts and physical events actually reflect spiritual realities. And they do that by using these words in connection and making you really play with what are they talking about? What are they really trying to get at? And you see that in the Hebrew in a way that you just don't see it in the English. So the point of all of this is to remind us that the people are not going to the prophet. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. And instead, they are deliberately going to people who are responsible for almost destroying Benjamin, not to mention what they did to the women.
Right.
So they come up with a brilliant solution. And they said, let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may be among us and save us from the power of our enemies. Now, in Judges 20:27, the Ark is moved from Shiloh. This is when they go up against Benjamin to fight them. So that's the last time this happened. Wasn't a good idea then. Probably not a good idea now.
As we later see.
Right. And this is the beginning of a sequence. And I'm not going to tell you what the sequence is. I'm being having a little fun here.
Okay.
But 9 times the writer combines 2 terms. And it's going to occur from chapter 4 to chapter 7. 9 times the writer's going to combine these 2 terms because he's going to be saying something important. And I'm going to tell you what it is when we get to the end of 7, but listen for it. So,
okay.
Yeah, he's going to scan the verse, see if you can see what it is.
No, I'm just looking to see where we are now.
Yeah, we're in verse 4.
Okay.
So the people sent to Shiloh and brought the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, who is enthroned on the cherubim. Also important. That's going to come back to the fact that the cherubim are specifically mentioned here. So the Ark of the Lord of Hosts, the Lord of Armies, the Lord of Angels, the Lord of an army of angels. So another translation that I recently learned is Lord of Wars. So there is a military application for the Ark. And we see that in Numbers 10:35 through 36. And Joshua chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 6. The Ark went around Jericho. And that was part of obeying God in that moment. But we've got to remember this is more than just a pretty box.
Right. This
isn't just something you're going to find at Hobby Lobby. And this is God's footstool on earth. If you go by Psalms 99:5 or Psalms 132:7 or Lamentations 2:1. Now, here and in Jeremiah 3 verses 16 and 17, it's identified as God's throne.
Right.
So the main thing is God's manifest presence is there with the ark.
Right.
And it was from the time they left Egypt. And the assumption is that moving the ark is the same as moving God. And, that's not wise.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. They they take the ark out like it's going to be some kind of good luck charm, like it's something that's going, like it's the ark and it's not God.
Yeah.
They if we've got the ark with us, then surely we can't lose.
Well, that's it. They're trying to blackmail God into helping them win.
Yeah.
Because if God's present on the war and they lose,
well, it's like gambling with God's throne.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty dicey. And
I mean, when you think about it, that's basically what they're doing.
it is. And they take this ark out of a holy place. And when they do that, and once again, they're not talking to Samuel. And if you'll notice in verse 4, who's moving the ark? It's Hophni and Phinehas.
Mm-hmm.
And they're with the ark of the covenant of the Lord is exactly what the text says. And it's a very pointed reminder that these two priests specifically are the ones present.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the ones who have been abusing the women who've been at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And now they have the audacity to actually touch the ark. This is, again, not wise.
Right.
I've seen Indiana Jones. I know what happens.
Oh, no.
So, but as the priest, they would have been the ones who actually physically carried it out of the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be important. And so verse 5, as soon as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all of Israel gave a mighty shout so that the earth resounded. And this resounded is the idea of the earth shaking.
Mm-hmm.
And here it seems that it's the people's voices that are making the earth shake.
Mm-hmm.
It's not God. It's the people.
Right.
And so there is, power in numbers and there's powers in unity that's just available to all humanity. But this is not the same as when God shakes the earth.
Right.
And, it was a pretty effective strategy at Jericho to give out a shout and to shake the earth. And, the walls fell down.
Mm-hmm.
So the Philistines, verses 6 through 7, they hear the shouting and they said, what does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrew mean? And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, a god has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. So the Philistines and the Israelites have the exact same theology at this point.
Right.
They're 100% in lockstep with each other. Because if the image of God has arrived, therefore God had to have arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing is, the Israelites and the Philistines shouldn't have the same view of God and gods.
Right.
They should
right.
have very divergent views of God because the Israelite God is not the same type of God that the Philistines worship.
Sure.
And that's the whole point of being holy, completely other. So, we can't really blame the Philistines. We can. I think there's actually a level and a place to have some respect for them.
Right.
At least they recognize they should be afraid. Where the Israelites are, we got the ark, we're going to throw a party. I mean,
yeah.
The Philistines, they didn't have the training. Yet here you've got the priest who, again, have behaved so horrifically, now daring to touch the ark. Mm-hmm. The contrast, and the contrast is just going to build. And the writer is so good at building that contrast. And so verses 8 and 9, woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage, be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight. So the Philistines think that the devastation in in Egypt was so great it couldn't just be one god. It had to be multiple gods.
Right.
And that tells you something about the power of our God versus other gods, that foreign nations were looking on and going, this has to be the work of a whole pantheon.
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be a single being.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Hadn't considered that, but that makes sense. I mean, I took note of the wording, and I was wondering if it was a translation choice or if it was that they were thinking it was more than one god.
It is a translation choice because it is Elohim, which we also know can be used for the name of God. But
right.
the context and the way it's being used, and especially if you look at the cultural context coming out of the mouths of the Philistines,
Right.
then you have to go, what is the right translation here? And I think the ESV did make a good call here. And they recognize what I thought was interesting, that these gods are dangerous.
Right.
Israel doesn't seem to have a clue. They think that they're okay to do whatever they want to do with the ark. It's also interesting that they know the history of Israel. And now there's some mix-up on where the plagues are, because the plagues are in the wilderness, but they know that the plagues happened. Well, it's not their history. I mean, a lot of commentators are like, oh my goodness, they don't know, and there's a mistake. It's the enemy talking about another nation's history.
Right.
We do this today. It's not that big of a problem.
Yeah. Like how often do you get a Christian commentator misrepresenting other religious practices?
Yeah, but they at least had some clue. And the thing is, Israel's the one who's supposed to tell their story. And we're going to see this in Samuel very many times coming up, that they're supposed to tell their story to themselves. As they're seeking guidance, they're supposed to remind themselves of what God did in Egypt and why the story of the Exodus is so important to their identity as a nation and as individuals. And the weird thing about this, beside all the other stuff, is there's a fear reversal. Instead of them saying, oh no, we can't do this, we need to run away and hide, they actually go, oh, if we're going to die, we're going to die. You stand up, be men, be brave. If we're going to fight this God, because this is what men do.
Yeah.
And so there might be something on that hated term, toxic masculinity there. But anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yes. We're not even going to start with that today.
But yeah, well, it's just so weird, because instead of seeing this as a reason to flee, they actually use it as a battle cry to rally the troops, which is what Israel should be doing. And there's going to be so many times going forward in Samuel that there is not.
Did you get your phone by the cable there?
I have no idea. I don't think so. But anyway.
Sorry, we got some noise here. Carry on.
Okay. Yeah. But Israel is I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. Instead of seeing these overwhelming numbers and saying our God is bigger, they're going to run away. And the Philistines have the faith response. Maybe it's faith in the wrong place, but they have a faith response to still be able to stand.
Right.
They're doing what the Israelites should have done. And now, verse 10, we find out that Israel's defeated. Every man flees to his home. And this is not an organized retreat. This is straight up desertion. And we're told that 30,000 foot soldiers die. Okay, that number is going to become significant much later in 2 Samuel, when David goes to collect the ark and take it into Jerusalem. He assembles 30,000 men. So we'll, I'm sure you'll forget. I'll forget by then, but we'll go, But
we'll touch on it later.
Yeah, we'll touch on it later. So the ark's captured in verse 11, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, they die. Okay, so the unthinkable has happened. The ark, God's throne, it's been taken. What kind of God can have his throne stolen by human beings? This is really messing with the theology of the day.
Right.
This is not supposed to happen. Phinehas and Hophni, they die carrying the ark. In essence, their disrespectful act makes them a target. And so here they thought the ark was going to protect them, and it actually probably plays a major part in why the Philistines chose to kill them, or could find them even.
Right. Well, I mean, I imagine the ark was kind of weighty and slow you down.
Well, could be. We're going to talk about that. So on the surface of all of this, it's almost like God has been defeated, or he's died, that Phinehas and Hophni have died. These 30,000 men, it's just death all over the place. And we're supposed to remember that in chapter 3, God prophesied this was going to happen. He told Eli, here's going to be the sign that your house is going to be cut off. And it said your two sons are going to die on the same day together. And this is to show us that even Hannah's prophecy of reversals, it's coming true. It's happening. So we have this God who's been defeated, yet somehow he's still managing to make his prophetic words happen.
Right.
If you're an ancient Israelite, this is frying your brain because none of this makes sense. And on top of that, we have that crazy mix-up of the Israelites' view of God and the Philistines' view of God. And, with everything pointing that basically you can put anybody into any role in the story and it's going to work because nobody's being who they are or who they're supposed to be or who we expect them to be. So anyway, verse 12. We're moving into the death of Eli. And a man of Benjamin ran from the battle and came to Shiloh the same day. His clothes were torn and dirt on his head. Now, in the book of Eli, the book of Samuel, book of Eli is a different story. Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
Nice movie. Anyway, book of Samuel. We're not supposed to be overly fond of Benjamin. This is where Saul's from. And of course, we want to support the Davidic monarchy.
Sure.
Now, Rashi claims that this man from Benjamin actually running up is Saul. And now he supports this by saying that when David eulogizes Saul in 2 Samuel 1:23, and he refers to this event, that Samuel's ability to run, that this is what he's talking about. Maybe not. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, just because of all the, quote unquote coincidences in the
right.
But at the same time, it's probably not. Now, this is a 20-mile run. I thought this was interesting. I couldn't run a mile if my life depended on it. And this guy runs 20 miles to tell the city what's happened. And there's a lot of connections with the story and events that are going to be happening in the future. So in 2 Samuel 1, we also have a man with torn clothes, dirt on his head. He's running from a battlefield, and he has the announcement of death, and deaths that end leadership. In 2 Samuel 15:32, again, we have another man. This time, an Archite came running to David with his clothes torn, dirt on his head. And David employs him as a spy. That's when Absalom took over the throne for a short period of time. So this idea of men coming in from battle with torn clothes, dirt, it's always about a regime change or an attempted regime change.
Okay.
And that theme plays throughout Samuel. Now, what's really interesting is if you look at the progression, because the torn clothing, the word in Hebrew is different. It might be the same in the English. Didn't look them up, but each word in the Hebrew is different. The here in 1 Samuel, this is referring to a uniform. He's a soldier.
Okay.
So it's literally means measured, and so that he's wearing an outfit that's been measured because
Gotcha.
uniform was measured. The second one is just a coat. I believe at that point it's an Ammonite who shows up. It's just a coat. It's not he's not a soldier.
Right.
But then by the time we get to Absalom's story, it's the same outfit that we find all of David's kids clothed in. It's the outfit that nobility wears. It's the outfit that Joseph was given by Pharaoh.
Right.
So there's a tip off in the change of station with all of these people. And the writer of Samuel, I just bring that up to show you he knows how to use his words well. And he puts these little hints within his writing that unless you're paying attention, you might not notice.
Right.
So anyway, that's a freebie. Verse 13, when he arrived, talking about the Benjaminite, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of the Lord. And the man came into the city, told the news, and all the city cried out. Now, contrast that with the beginning of the story. They cried out and they made the earth tremble because they were so confident they were going to win. And now there's lament. And so the writer's showing you can't trust a big army. Matter of fact, in Samuel, if you have a massive army, they're going to lose. Anytime there's any kind of significant military force, God's going to say, I'm not going to be a part of that. But this is, this is kind of to be expected that they would lose at this point because we know nothing's going right. And also notice Eli's concern is not for his sons.
Right. He's worried about the ark.
Yeah. So he's not a bad guy. He really does love the Lord. He really does want to protect the things that belong to God. He's kind of clueless. And matter of fact, this is kind of an interesting contrast that we also see in the scripture. You can take somebody like Rebecca, who she is very wise and she knows how to get her favorite son the blessing, but she may not be the most moral person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And she's always acting. She may not be doing the right thing, but she's always acting. Whereas Eli, he seems to have a heart for the Lord, and he seems to have a very focused view of the world that is on the Lord, so much so that he can't see anything beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a warning to us, that Jesus really meant what he said when he said, be wise as serpents and harmless as a dove, that we're supposed to balance both of those things. Because if you're too far off to the right or the left with that, you're going to get yourself in trouble, maybe even your own family. But he is sitting in his chair. This is a sign of wealth and authority. It's basically a throne.
Mm-hmm.
And when he hears the uproar, notice he's sitting by the road where the people are watching,
mm-hmm.
waiting for messengers. He didn't see the messenger. He's completely blind. He's sitting in the place of watching, but he can't see anything. And he's blind at this point. So when he hears, because that's Eli's superpower, he can hear, he just can't see.
Mm-hmm.
He's wanting to know what's going on. And the young man tells us what happens. But before that, we were also told that Eli's 98 years old and he is completely blind. So his spiritual condition is now mirrored in his physical condition.
Right.
So the man tells Eli the news. Israel has fled. Hophni and Phinehas are dead. The ark has been captured. So verse 18. As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken. He died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel for 40 years.
Okay. Now, I'm curious about this.
Mm-hmm.
And now, is Eli the only one who's mentioned as a judge who is also a priest?
I believe so. Aside from Samuel.
Okay, aside from Samuel, I'm curious if there's any kind of like tie to. Okay, so Heiser talks about the splitting of the royalty and the priesthood, right?
Right.
So, and you were talking about Eli is a judge. He's in a ruling station there, also sitting on basically a throne as a sign of wealth. He is a priest as well. Now, I do wonder if there is some kind of like an idea of possibly Eli on his own volition trying to set himself up in this order of Melchizedek type of model.
I don't know if it would be that thought out.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just curious.
Well, and I'm trying to, I'm kind of having to do a little psychology on Eli. Is he that ambitious? Because I don't see any ambition in him other than the fact he's on this throne. And that could be, we don't know where he got the throne. Did his sons provide it for him as a way to elevate themselves? Now, I can see them doing that.
Well, that's possible. Although you don't get to be high priest, and you also don't get to be judge without some kind of ambition.
This is
I mean, it's not necessarily specific or explicit in the text, but there has to be something if you're in those positions.
Right. Well, and, now with judge, that is something that God raises up a judge. So you don't get to just choose.
Right.
But at the same time, and priest is hereditary, but again, that high priest role is something that you get. But again, what are the priests doing? We know they've been running around all over the countryside doing stuff they shouldn't. So is Eli one of just the few left there who...
Yeah, that's possible. I was just wondering if there was some kind of like attempt on his part to to set himself up in that position.
Yeah, I don't know if it was him. I kind of, like I said, and we're having to psychologize about his personality from a little bit of information here. But I can see Hophni and Phinehas hoping that being the sons of the high priest, knowing that one of them was going to inherit that role, trying to make it even more grandiose than what it was.
And I may be onto absolutely nothing as well. So that was just a question.
It's an interesting thought, because here's the other thing, because Gideon had done something similar. Now, he wasn't doing it at the tabernacle or at Shiloh. He set himself up as a king. He rejected the title, but at the same time, he still took all of the perks of being a king, established the throne. And then, of course, his son Abimelech, he kills all of his brothers and becomes the first unanointed king, but he does take the title of king. And then we have a problem with Samuel, which we're going to get into, because Samuel's got a problem with the idea of a king, and part of it seems to hinge on the idea that he had appointed his sons as judges, which that's a no-no. God raises up judges; they're not appointed by man. So
I just got them business cards, and you're eliminating the position.
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much. And so, no, there seems to be this real problem. And then, okay, so my brain's running because when we get into Saul, one of the problems with Saul is that he makes the crossover the opposite direction. He tries to do the role and the work of a priest when he was just the king. So again, all of those muddled roles, there's no clear hierarchy, at least none that people are willing to respect.
Yeah. So,
but no, but these are the good questions, because when you start to study these stories and you become familiar with them, you do begin to see these kind of overlaps and how they fit together. And even if you don't have a good answer, rule number 5, according to me, for biblical exegesis, for what it's worth, is if you aren't creating more questions than you're answering, you're probably doing it wrong.
Sure.
So, and so we're doing it right. But
I hope so.
Me too.
I hope so.
Me too. But, Eli, he does handle the death of his sons. He just kind of, and he's okay, but this actually makes me think, because one of the requirements for being a king is that you have a son to pass it on to. And he doesn't seem to be worried about the fact that his sons are dead.
Right. And maybe not even necessarily that it was specifically with Melchizedek in mind, but it was just something that wasn't supposed to happen yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's only in Christ we see the
exactly.
reunification.
Yeah. It's something that men were trying to do that only Jesus was supposed to do.
And that's a problem, because that's exactly where
always a problem.
Yeah, that's the theme. One of the themes in Samuel is people doing things they're not supposed to do before it's time to do it, and why God is never happy about it. And so, no, that's good. We could play with that idea.
So, well, you're talking about timing. Who was it? Was it someone was it in the paddle store, or was it in the Raven Creek? Was it TJ?
That sounds about right.
Was talking about how
TJ asked good questions.
He asked great questions. Shout out to TJ. Anyway, he was talking about reading the wisdom literature and how so much of that is concerned with timing and knowing when things are appropriate. So we also have kind of a tie-in to that theme as well. So we see that in the narrative and in the wisdom literature. Well, so that's kind of cool.
We see it in Genesis 3, sorry. Don't eat. You're not ready for the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't that God was going to keep them ignorant. The timing was wrong. And, that's a whole other teaching. But we see that runs through everything. And most sins are not sins of doing something is wrong. You're just doing it at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And now there are a few things that you should never do. But
sure.
Really, that's the short list.
Right.
So
yeah. So TJ, thanks for your contribution. We're going to double what we pay you.
Exactly. Right? So, but there's also a couple of things going on with Samuel beyond, he's just upset because the ark has been stolen. He falls backwards off his throne and he breaks his neck. And there's some important details. We're told that he's old. Remember, when you get excessive detail in the Bible, the writer's trying to tell you something because we don't get excessive detail. We've just had some major battles and we know almost nothing about them.
Mm-hmm.
But he's old. So the writer is excluding Eli from the curse that God has put on his house. Eli's not part of that. He wasn't cursed along with his sons because he was not the one who was doing these things.
Right.
So the curse begins with Hophni and Phinehas. Eli just gets to witness it, which, that's pretty horrible in and of itself if you're a parent. Fortunately, he only had to live with it for, 3 seconds.
Right.
So he's dethroned. His rule.
Yeah. Were we going to go on with the other details other than he was old?
Oh, he's heavy. Yeah, I skipped that one.
Now, is this the same word? Is this as glory?
Yes.
And this is one of those examples of where we have to use context clues because we weren't saying it was because we're not trying to say he was old and glorious.
Right?
Necessarily. Seems a little awkward.
Well, and particularly knowing the corruption that was going on at Shiloh.
Exactly.
And yes, context is what rules here. And he's old and he's heavy and he's burdensome is another name in translation of that word. And so we're being told kind of about his physical stature. He dies of a broken neck. He's symbolically decapitated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when he hears about the ark. It's specifically connected to when he hears about the ark.
Right.
And so these little details, they're going to show up again in chapter 5. So you might want to hang on to those in the back of your brain.
Okay.
So this is the last time that Shiloh is seen as a place of worship. The ark is never returned to Shiloh, not once. Samuel, actually, after this, he's going to move the spiritual place of worship to Ramah. That's where his parents were from. So he finally gets to go home.
It's good to be self-employed, I guess.
Yeah.
You just work from anywhere.
Yeah. Well, and he does. He works from 4 different cities, and he just makes a circuit, and that's going to play a part of his story too. But we're never specifically told Shiloh is destroyed in Samuel. Where we do have references to it is in Psalm 78:60 and in Jeremiah 7 verses 12 through 14, and then again in 26 verses 6 and 9. And it explicitly tells us that Shiloh was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Samuel's prophecy to Eli contained that word, the ears are going to tingle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another reason we think that probably it was destroyed, because the only other times we have that phrase used is in connection with destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem. Now, Finkelstein, if you remember our conversation with Becca, Finkelstein's an archaeologist.
Oh, right.
And he has confirmed that there is the appropriate ash layer at the appropriate time at Shiloh, that Shiloh was destroyed by fire.
Okay.
So we can confirm that Shiloh was destroyed at this point. We can't specifically say that it was because this is what happened.
Right.
But we can say a destruction happened. And we really don't have any other historical reason to expect there to be destruction at Shiloh. So, but Finkelstein also, I believe Becca said, he's one that does not necessarily believe the Bible is a credible source for historical details.
Sure.
So, basically, all of that to say, everything's pointing to the fact that this is the end of Shiloh.
Okay.
So, verse 19, Phinehas' wife, she hears that, the ark has been destroyed, that her husband's dead, her brother-in-law's dead, her father-in-law's dead. And when she hears this, she immediately goes into labor. And the women tell her not to be afraid. She's had a son, but she pays absolutely no attention. And so in verse 21, it tells us that she names this child Ichabod, or we say Ichabod. This is not the same Ichabod that fights the headless horseman. This is a different one.
Right.
And now the ESV translated, the glory has departed. That's the reason for him to have this name. But a better translation is the glory has been exiled.
Right.
Exiled means something totally different to us as, Bible
Departed.
Readers. Yeah. Departed. Okay, he went home for the evening.
Right.
So,
gone on vacation.
Yeah. We know exile is not good. It's a punishment. And so we don't want to hear that our God has gone into exile. But this is the name she gives her child in verse 21. But then in verse 22, she repeats herself. She said, "The glory has departed from Israel, where the ark of the Lord is captured." So the rest of the reasons don't matter. The thing she's concerned about, once again, we have a woman who has a clue that the men don't seem to understand. And she's saying, I get it. This is wrong. This shouldn't have happened. And she probably recognizes that her husband, played a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So this story actually connects us back to Genesis 35, verses 16 through 20. And this is the story of Rachel giving birth to Benjamin along the roadside. They were on their way. They left Laban's house, and she goes into labor, and it's not where they expect. They haven't arrived yet. They're probably hoping to get to a camp before she gave birth. It was very hard labor. And Rachel realizes that she's dying, and she names Benjamin. She actually names him Ben-Ami, which son of my sorrow, son of my grief. Another translation, which is more disputed, but I think works within the narrative better, is son of my sin.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a confession, she'd taken the teraphim and she shouldn't. So we've got this idea of taking things you shouldn't also connected back in. Now the women attending this woman here, Phinehas's wife, says, "Do not be afraid, for you have a son." And the women attending Rachel say, "Do not be afraid, for you have another son."
Mm-hmm.
So almost the exact same wording. And the children are both named by their dying mothers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the tragedy is that there's no father to rename Ichabod,
Right.
where Jacob says, "Son of my sorrow, that can't be my son."
Right.
But the son of my strength, that can be my son.
Yeah, and that was actually what I was thinking of. Like, so not being able to be renamed. Interesting.
Well, and it is because it has such major consequences, and because when you get renamed in the Old Testament, you're not just getting a new name; you're getting a totally new identity. Your destiny's being changed. And think about that in context with the New Testament, where we get a new identity, we're reborn, and now we're children of God. And it doesn't matter what was said about us before. The only thing that matters is the Father has given us a name.
Mm-hmm.
So this tie to Rachel is another point within Samuel that we're going to see, because Saul's a Benjaminite. He is one of the children of Rachel. And Rachel's tomb is going to play a part in this. And that's going to be really interesting. But we're going to get to that later.
Right.
But also Ichabod's birth kind of stands in contrast, it does, with the birth of Samuel. Because Samuel's mother had prophesied there's going to be a reversal. And there's going to be hope for the marginalized.
Mm-hmm.
Ichabod should have been born into this place of honor. He should have been, remembered and celebrated as one of the future priests.
Right.
And he's born in the midst of tragedy. And Ichabod's mother mourns the fulfillment of the prophecy because she recognizes what it means for her son.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a dying mother who knows her son's going to die young. How young is that? What's he going to get to experience? Is he going to live to be married? Is he going to have kids? All of these questions while she's dying in a place that's getting ready to be destroyed.
Right.
This is a horrible birth compared to Samuel, who, his birth is supernatural, and he is the product of prophecy, and he is going to prophesy. One child celebrates God's power to answer prayers. The other child is a lament that God has been defeated. So they're at opposite ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And, everything keeps pointing us back to the question, how can God be defeated? How can he be sent into exile and still make his prophecies come true? This would have blown their minds. They wouldn't have been able to grasp it. But we know that this is not something that's just an ancient problem. This is something that we still have to grapple with, that it's very rarely an either or situation. And we have a hard time thinking there's a third option, and that God had removed himself. And no one had taken him.
Yeah. Well, it's like we talked about last time with, God letting the temple be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And even in this, and, I might be jumping ahead here, but, there's the idea, there's kind of a type of the crucifixion narrative where
Precisely.
Jesus says, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down. And it's so.
Well, no, but we're right back to that question. How does a God die? How is a God defeated? Is
Right.
a God who can be defeated worthy of our worship? How do the dead live again?
Well, if a God, and that's the thing. It's not a God who can be defeated by anyone else's strength, but it's only by giving up, or not giving up. But it's hard to articulate the it's terribly hard to articulate the mystery that is the crucifixion and resurrection. Let's not even get into how does the foundation of the universe enter the universe.
Yeah. Well, but this is all foreshadowing. And because, yes, to the Israelite there at Shiloh getting this news from the messenger, it does look like the end.
Mm-hmm.
It looks absolutely devastating. And the same thing, I mean, think about the apostles at the night of the crucifixion. Where were they? What were they thinking and saying and doing to try to cope with the loss of their Lord?
Well, I mean, there's that, but I mean, I'm also thinking about just other, just some of the other stuff that's presented in the gospel narrative, and I've got more to talk about this, but I want to wait till we get through the next section before I talk about it. But something that's kind of interesting is you have someone who runs to tell the news that we've been defeated, and in the gospel, you have someone who runs to tell the news that he's alive. I mean, it's really amazing when you all these ties back and forth.
Yeah, and the reversals and how they make you see the greater story of the Bible, and you begin to realize that this really can't be a book that some people just got around the table one night and said, okay, you write this part and I'm going to write that part. It really had to be divinely inspired to encompass all this, because every time you find a new connection, you're finding a new way that God says, how are we going to weave the story a little tighter? Mm-hmm. How are we going to make it make a little bit more sense that the people don't expect?
Yeah, and if they're not convinced yet,
yeah,
wait, there's more.
I mean, there's a reason why faith might come from hearing, and
so no, it really does blow my mind whenever you start looking at all the ties. And again, and we're not ones who typically just automatically read Jesus into the authorial intent. Mm-hmm. And again, the
I don't think
person with pen in hand may not have been thinking that.
Yeah, I don't think that was even on the radar.
But again, because here's the other thing: if you take Heschel, that the Bible is not man's book about God, but it's God's book about man. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about that. And God saying, this is the way the world works. 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 And then we get to the gospel and Jesus saying, this is the way my kingdom works. Mm-hmm. And it's a totally different, I mean, it's not totally different, but it's again, that reversal theme and getting into, this is what I had for humanity.
From the beginning.
From the beginning. Yeah. It's not, yeah.
Yeah. And then when you tie that back into Judges and you talk about the Exodus and you talk about, I will send my word before you. There's the angel with my name in him, and that Jesus was there, and that he tabernacled. John 1:1, or not John 1, John 1. Sorry,
yeah, John chapter 1. Yeah, yeah. And the Word became flesh, and yeah.
He tabernacled with the people, and so God has been showing the world from the beginning of time. My desire, my hope, is to be with you. Mm-hmm. That's all I really want. Is to be with you. I want to be remembered in the things that you do. And, isn't that every human relationship? I mean, Ty brings me home a bag of sour gummy worms because he remembered me while he was at the convenience store. I'm happy.
Right.
So, this is, if we can see these things in human relationships, why do we think that a divine relationship is so complicated? Mm-hmm. It's so simple. But yet we have to complicate it, and we have to add on all of these different things that you've got to do in order to please God. And God says, just remember me. And well, how do you remember him? By loving him. And how do you love him? Don't do the things he doesn't like.
Right.
It's the same principle. We can grasp this. The faith of the Bible is not hard because it is all about relationship. And I think we forget that. And we kind of think that it is about all of these ritual observances. And the thing is, as we move forward into Samuel, we're going to have a guy who's really good at ritual observances.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He's very pious. He's got the religion down. He knows how to make the over-the-top grand gestures of faith. Mm-hmm. But he blows it.
Yeah.
Over and over again. And it actually serves as a warning for us that it's not about being pious. It's about having faith, and faith enough to believe that God is who he says he is,
mm-hmm.
and that he will do what he says he will do. And we've got to stop trying to help him out, because all that is doubt.
Right.
And it's a questioning of his love and a refusal to let his love be manifest in us and through us. And so I know we probably borderlined on preaching there, but
Yeah. Well, and actually, it's kind of funny, and this is kind of an illustration. I know God is not a child, but it's whenever as parents we see our kids doing something like, my oldest daughter is learning to tie her shoes. And I just watch it and I'm like, I want to help,
mm-hmm.
but I have to believe that she can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because she can, it takes
Right.
her longer, but we, and again, God's not the child. It's just, we treat him like he's the child.
We do.
Like, you don't know what's going on. You just showed up on the scene, but no, he was there the whole time.
Well, how many times do we amend his word? Well, we know that it says this in the Bible, but it really means that. Because, he's not capable of speaking in a way that we understand.
Sure.
And instead of believing that, we'll use an example that's pretty familiar with me and what I do otherwise, premarital sex. God says, don't do it.
Right.
And, it's not a good idea. And now we know that just, factually, as far as, taking the religion aspect out of it,
mm-hmm.
it's not a good idea.
Right.
And there's physical ramification, there's emotional ramifications, and there's mental ramifications. And there's a lot of times in today's culture, there's financial ramifications.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, instead of saying, hey, God might actually have a clue about this thing called humanity and how we need to live, we try to help him out.
Yep.
Because it just seems too hard. And what's hard is waiting until the appropriate time. So
to tie it all back together. So I think that's a good spot to end. I do want to kind of wrap up some more of the crucifixion stuff once we get through the next section.
Okay.
But I don't want to have to fight for time, or we're coming up close to the hour mark. And so everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Be back next week, and we'll go into more of this and how it ties into the story of Christ, because I do want to make sure everyone knows we love Jesus. We're all about the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we spend a lot of time in the Old Testament.
He's there too.
He's been there the whole time. So anyway, be sure to join us next week. If you want to be part of the conversation, ravencreeksc.com or Raven Creek SC on all the social media. You can find us, and we'll be glad to join you. Glad for you to join us in the conversation. Speculation, ideas, thoughts, and whatever else you got going on. If you really did like what you heard and you want to help us kind of keep paying our hosting fees and possibly upgrading some equipment in the future, be sure to hit up patreon.com/RavenCreekSC, where you can maybe pass us a couple bucks and buy us some coffee and pay for Emily's gas money driving back and forth. So anyway, thank you again, and we will be back next time. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.